Hey, what's up you guys? You're watching Team APS, Paul here. Before I hop into today's video, I just want to say that I'm currently saving up money and selling some of my supplies and stuff to get a new camera and some different audio equipment. So I'm kind of in a transition phase right now, and that's why I've been recording with my webcam. Now I know you guys actually really liked the other videos, so I'm gonna pretty much just stick with that until I get my new stuff. Excuse this sort of slight quality decrease, but I do think that I have a fun way that I'm going to do today's video, or at least one that saves me a little bit of editing time. So we're going to talk about the 10, I don't know if I would call this underrated, but 10 secret rare cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That just seemed like they kind of went under the radar completely. And so the context for this is basically like, in every set there's like, what, 8 secret rare cards? And there's always like the chase secret rares. Like, from Raging Tempest, of course, there was like Zodiac Barrage, and, that grass looks greener, and maybe Broad Bull and Trident. But that's kind of how it's been for every set. So, think, Dimensional Barrier, totally awesome. Pot of Desires, those kind of cards. But they're also just secret rare cards that kind of just get swept under the rug and nobody cares about them. And I think that some of them have potential. Now, that being said, these aren't like incredible cards, but I mean, like, they're not bad cards either. So they're all worth taking a look at. And the funny thing is, they're all pretty cheap. So, yeah, I'm going to just have them appear here on the screen, and we can just read through them. So the first one, Mistaken Arrest. Now this card, to be fair, did get some publicity, like when it was released. It kind of came out around the time of Shared Ride. I think it came out after Shared Ride. Yeah, it came out after Shared Ride, and Shared Ride was probably the more popular card. But Mistaken Arrest is pretty good. It's a quick play spell until the end of your next turn. After this card resolves, neither player can add cards from their deck to their hand except by drawing them. So this is basically a way to shut off a lot of searching, which is, even though not as prevalent technically in today's game, it's always going to be like a big part of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just, searching loads of cards from your deck to your hand. At the time when this came out, what is this, Clash of Rebellion? I guess it wouldn't have been necessarily all too great. I mean, Cosmos had just come out, but it was still kind of Burning Abyss, and a few of those decks were big. So I see why maybe people didn't care too much for this card. I mean, on a basic level, the card Mistake itself, the trap, technically does the same thing, except it lasts much longer, and then Shared Ride gives you pluses for it. So I see why this would be seen as the weakest of the bunch. But I mean, with that said, it's also not a bad card because, you can chain this to stuff and it won't be MSTable like, it is, but like, it's not as susceptible to MST as something like Mistake is. So if I activate Reinforcement of the Army, you can chain Mistaken Arrest to that, and I don't get anything. And unlike with Mistake, I couldn't chain my MST to stop it. And it even stops for 2 turns, so that's pretty cool too. Now, one small thing to note is it can stop you from searching, so make sure that you keep that in mind. But yeah, second card, this is awesome. I can just press this like button, poof. Second card is Full Force Virus. So it's a trap, and it's actually really recent. It came in Raging Tempest. You tribute a dark monster with 2,000 or more defense, check your opponent's hand, all the monsters they control, and all the cards they draw until the end of their 3rd turn after this card's activation. Destroy all the monsters with 1,500 or less defense. So this works essentially like all of the old virus cards. It's really simple. Well, it's not actually all that simple. I mean, it has a lot of things it does, but it's really simple to incorporate if you know how those work. And so the best part about this is that there are actually a lot of dark decks that have monsters that have 2,000 or more defense. It's kind of a steep cost, but remember that the Dark Lord deck that recently came out, almost all of their monsters, actually I think pretty much all of their monsters have over 2,000 defense, so it's really good. And there are other dark monster decks that work with this. In fact, Dark Magician comes to mind for one. And some Blackwing decks, like most of their synchros, will have over 2,000 defense, so there's that. Now, what this card is actually really good against, surprisingly, is Zodiacs, because the Zodiac monsters don't have any attack or defense, or at least normally they don't really. So yeah, just by using this, you can essentially cut out all of their stuff. And of course, this isn't nearly as broken as like Crush Card Virus was, but I mean, still, it's a really cheap card. It's only going for a few bucks. It's not something that a lot of people are paying attention to because, they're more concerned about pulling like Barrage. So you've got these people buying these boxes trying to pull Zodiac Barrage and stuff, and then they just get all these Full Force viruses. They don't care. They throw them online. So it might be worth picking up a copy of. Next card is Coral Dragon. So this is a secret that came from the Dark Illusion, and it's not like super cheap, but it's still pretty cheap, like for a secret, maybe $8 or $9. Created kind of in the vein of Bryonic. you can, once per turn, discard a card, target a card your opponent controls, and destroy it. And then also, if this thing gets sent from the field to the grave, you actually get to draw a card. So that's pretty cool. It's only once per turn, which is kind of, but still, like, you're just able to pitch a card and pop a card. So if you're using this in something like Mermails, you've got plenty of ways to trigger your Atlanteans effects, which is quite useful. In addition to that, you can also just use this in any deck that can make like a level 6 synchro, and it even floats. And we all know floating's pretty good. 2400 attack's not shabby for a level 6. So yeah, I think that's all there really is to say about that. Next card is Painful Escape. So this is a card that actually came out in, I don't remember the original set because this is the reprinted one from the Megatins, but it came out around the same time, or maybe even the same set as Painful Decision, which is a spell that got used in a lot of decks. But this card actually is really cool. It's similar to Transmodify, spoiler warning. But yeah, tribute a monster, add a monster with the same original type, attribute, and level, but a different name from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So the first thing that comes to mind for me with this is something like Burning Abyss, where you can just tribute any Burning Abyss monster and get any other Burning Abyss monster. They're all level 3 dark fiends, so that works. You can even search Tour Guide with that if you're using a Burning Abyss monster, so that's really neat. In addition to that, works quite well with let's see, Fire Fists. Anything that Ties the Brethren works in actually would work pretty well in. I think this could work decently in Frogs, Fire Fists, Harpies. That's just stuff off the top of my head. I mean, I'm sure I'm forgetting something, so feel free to experiment with this card. But yeah, this thing is super, super cheap, so there's really no reason not to just like pick it up and try something out with it. Like, I mean, come on. Next card is one that actually did see some play for a while, so maybe I'm a little bit wrong here, but Magical Spring. This is when I first read this card, like first read this card, like in 2014, I actually didn't quite understand it, but then it all made sense over time. So it's a quick play spell. You draw a number of cards equal to the number of face-up spell or trap cards your opponent controls. Then you discard a number of cards equal to the number of face-up spell and trap cards you control. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, after this card is activated, spell and trap cards your opponent controls can't be destroyed by battle or card effect. And also, their activation and effects cannot be negated. You can only activate one Magical Spring per turn. So, just to quickly unpack this card, basically, if your opponent has a bunch of like face-up spell and traps, let's say Fiendish Chains, Call of the Haunted, some continuous spell like Supply Squad or Field Spell or whatever, then if they have like maybe 3 of them, you get to draw 3 cards, and then you discard up to equal to the number of face-up spell and traps you control. Normally that won't be anything except for your own Magical Spring, because remember, it does count itself, so you'll always have to discard at least 1. And so that can net you some major pluses against decks that do that. In addition, until the end of your opponent's next turn after this card gets activated, their spells and traps can't be destroyed by anything. So that means you can't MST them. But I think we might be missing something here because, remember, Pendulum monsters are face-up spells when they're in the Pendulum zones. And that's where this card really shines, because you're able to draw cards equal to their Pendulum scales. Like if they have 2 scales out, and anything else, let's just say anything else. But even at minimum, if they have 2 scales out, you can activate Magical Spring, draw 2 cards, and then just discard 1 for Magical Spring. So that's really good draw power. But in addition to that, until the end of your opponent's next turn, their cards can't be destroyed. And you might be thinking, well, that's a benefit to them, but not really, because remember, most Pendulum monsters actually have effects that destroy themselves in the Pendulum zone or something else. Let's take, say, Luster Pendulum, for example, destroys the card in the other Pendulum scale and then searches another. Well, with Magical Spring, you actually can't do that. You could even chain Magical Spring to the effect of a Luster Pendulum and stop it from resolving that way. So, really, really good. Neat card, and it came from Duelist Alliance, so it's quite old, but it's quite cheap right now. And I think it actually got reprinted too, so easy to pick up. Next card is Transmodify. So I hinted at this earlier with Painful Decision, but you send a face-up monster you control to grave, summon a monster from your deck which has the same type and attribute as that monster, but is 1 level higher. So there are a couple things that came to mind when this card was released. Like in the Agent deck, for example, you can go from, like, back when agents were a thing, you go from something like, say, a Mystical Shine Ball to an Agent, or from Agent Earth to Agent Venus. Then you go from Agent Venus to Agent thing that gains 800 attack, forget the name off the top of my head. There are actually quite a few different things you can do with this. The biggest use I think this card saw was in Infernities, where you could use it on stuff like, say, Beetle to get Necromancer, and mainly Necromancer to get Infernity Archfiend, so really fast way to summon that from the deck. This is like combo potential to me. Like cards like this don't come out very much these days, so this is one of those cards you can explore, have a little bit of fun with. Fire Fists comes to mind. I think that they have some level 3, 4, and 5 Fire Fist monsters, so it could work quite well there. Similar in a way to just cards like Ties the Brethren. So yeah, Transmodify, and it's been reprinted as well, so not hard to get. Ultimate Provenance is next, and it's a counter trap. So it's basically the same as that new card Invoked Makaba. If a spell, trap, or monster effect gets activated, you discard the same type of card and negate it. So Alec actually used this in his Performer Pal deck because he's using Guiding Ariadne, and it's kind of a, you know, poor man's like Solemn Strike if you want. You know, if you want to negate a monster effect, you just discard a monster. If you want to negate a spell, so on. And pretty good. I mean, you know, it's really, really cheap. If you do run Guiding Ariadne in whatever deck you're running, then all the better. It makes this card completely free to negate anything at once. So, whoosh, right? And so that makes it cheap, makes it pretty good. Even if you don't, like, it's one of the better counter traps to come out in recent years that isn't a Solemn card. Next is Pot of Riches, which is something that saw like a little bit of play, a little bit of attention, but so far hasn't really made like a huge splash. It's basically, you know, your Pot of Avarice, Pot of Dichotomy type of card for Pendulum monsters. So you shuffle 3 of your Pendulum monsters into the deck, and then and that's from their graveyard or face up in the extra deck, which is cool. And then you'd get to draw 2 cards. You can only get 1 per turn. You can only Pendulum summon that turn. So this can be useful for a couple of reasons. Most people would think, you wouldn't really want to shuffle them from your face up extra deck back into your deck, but that is an option. But why would they be in the grave? Probably because you've been using them for Xyz summons. Because we know that Pendulum decks in general do a great job of getting out a lot of fodder, but the issue sometimes is that, you know, when they make, say, Synchros with that, then or not Synchros, but Xyz monsters with that, then the fodder goes to the grave when they get detached, but this will let you recycle those. So it's pretty cool. It's just a good one-of tech in any given Pendulum deck you're running. Again, an Alex Pendulum, Performer Pal Pendulum deck, he's running this card just as a tech. It's a lot of fun, so check it out. In fact, check out his deck profile if you haven't. I'll try to remember to link it. Next card is Cerebus, the Ancient and Ascended. So, ritual monster. What? Like, why is this on the list? Because, you know, okay, you can ritual summon it with Sprite's Blessing and it can do a thing, but the actual main thing is it is actually a hand trap. Not the best hand trap, mind you, but actually a pretty decent one. During either player's turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a monster you control, you can discard this card and negate the activation. So, you know, whereas things like Maxi and Effect Veiler and Ghost Reaper are all like kind of work in their own ways, this actually is pretty good too. If your opponent ever targets any of your monsters with something, you can just pitch this card off and, you know, there it goes. This card's even searchable with Preparation of Rites, which is pretty neat. I mean, you know, a way to search it is always nice. The only problem, I guess, is that if you aren't able to summon it, sometimes it could be a bit dead in your hand. But remember, you can run this card technically without actually intending to ritual summon it at all. Now, if you are running, say, Cyber Angels or something like that, or, you know, a Herald deck, you can still run this, and it's a good card, it's a good effect as a ritual monster, but just as a standalone hand trap, not that bad, and like it's cheap. I mean, you know, these are the kinds of cards where even if you don't think it's great, it's cheap, why not give it a try? And the last card is Soul Transition. This was briefly used in Cleaforts, but basically if you don't have any special summon monsters, you contribute a face-up level 4 normal summon or set monster and draw 2 cards. And you know, you can't still summon the turn you use it. So it was used in Cleafort's early game whenever you just had, like, say, a normal little Cleafort monster, treated as level 4, you tribute it off, you get to draw 2, and then the Cleafort's effect would activate that would, like, say, get rid of one of your opponent's cards. So a nice, easy plus. But I mean, this can work in any deck that's kind of slow and stunny, just using it to send off a monster and get free draws, especially if you chain it to something like, you know, Effect Veiler or anything else that maybe targets your monster, a Bottomless or something. It'd all be really good ways to kind of make a plus out of a bad situation. So yeah, that actually concludes all of the cards that I had to say. So I'm just gonna go through them one more time. You can see them on the screen. That's because I'm actually deleting them. But yeah, so basically those are some underrated secret rare cards. They're all pretty cheap, they're all pretty easy to get, and they're off the radar, but I mean, these are the type of cards where you never know. If these became really good one day, then because they're secrets, they might get really expensive, so maybe it's a good idea to just pick them up now after watching this video. Anyway, that concludes. I hope you guys liked it. Remember to thumbs up if you did and subscribe if you loved the video. Like I said, I'm currently investing in some new video making supplies, so I'll be back up and running at maybe normal standards soon. And also, I'm going to be giving away a box of Duelist Saga next month when it comes out. And I normally only give away one box, but I'm thinking about giving away 2 boxes if we reach like maybe 60,000 subscribers before that time or close to that time. I'll talk about it more later, but yeah, so just something to get you a little bit excited. That's the video. Hope you guys liked it, and I will catch you in the next one. Later.